What can completely destroy your life in a matter of seconds? Messing with the wrong person, or at least thinking I had. About 15 years ago, I was renting the second floor of a woman's house, and her loser ex-boyfriend was living in the basement. He constantly talked about how he knew people in the club, a certain motorcycle club that is fairly infamous, and that I should respect him for it. I paid this very little attention because anyone who had any say in their operations wouldn't be a basement-dwelling loser who had no job and barely left the house. One day I heard my landlady screaming for help and went down to the basement to find him trying to force himself on her. So after I got her out of the room, I beat the brakes off him and dragged him outside for the police to cart away. He told me I didn't know who I was messing with, and I told him I didn't care one bit. Which is a fine ideal to have when you're dealing with a no-name loser. Less so when 6 guys in Harleys roll up while you're making some barbecue and the 6'6" head dude strolls up in full colors and asks, "Hey, you're Tim Sider fan, right? Basement dweller told us how you messed him up the other day." Yes, it was the biker gang you think it was. Yes, I nearly crapped in my pants. I then said, "Yeah, that's me." Turns out he was friends with the landlady, not the lowlife loser slapped around a basement until the police got there. Until he passed, he was actually a buddy and he'd come by to have a few beers and have a nice talk maybe once every couple of weeks or so. But there's no greater, and this is when he knows he messes up, moment than when a freaking gang member you have never met rolls up on you with 5 other full patch members and asks if you're the guy he's searching for. I would have soiled myself too if a biker gang approached me like that too, man. Honestly, I've heard a lot of stories from that certain gang and a lot of them are actually really nice. Story 2. Details of what happened exactly aren't really documented fully, but making a snide comment at the wrong person. In my case, that led to being jumped from behind, I never saw it coming, knocked out cold and hit my head on a cement sidewalk. Come back to self-consciousness hours later in the emergency hospital room, being restrained because apparently I was fighting the nurses. When this level of consciousness returned, the first thing I asked was, what the hell is going on? Took them a minute to realize the totality of what had happened to me. Apparently I had to be revived at the scene. This is not a fact I learned until years later. Perpetrator was never charged with anything. They treated it as drunk people fighting. And that wasn't at all the case of what happened. The detective assigned to the case never even returned my calls, even though I had found out the guy's name, who and where he was staying with that weekend, had come to visit friends, and that the police had questioned him later that night. The district attorney didn't even know that I had been taken to the hospital and suffered injuries. Severe concussion and basilar skull fracture. I now have permanent hearing loss in my right ear from it as well. I thought that would improve with time. At least I know my buddies pounded the crap out of him after it happened. It was some guy and his friends being drunken a-holes at a competing party at the neighbor's place. They'd already been kicked out of the party I was at for harassing girlfriends, like grabbing and worse stuff. He was calling all of us names and stuff from across the yard. I don't even remember what I said. Story 3. A false accusation. The moment anyone hears about it, especially if it's related to SA, your life is over. Even if you're found innocent, the label will stick forever. A guy I used to play basketball against was accused of doing unspeakable acts to a girl at a party he wasn't even at. The police came to his school in the middle of an assembly of half the school, arrested him and carted him off in handcuffs to be questioned. He was held without any legal representation and his parents weren't informed until he didn't come home from school and they called the school to find out where he was. The school was told by the police that they would contact his parents so they didn't need to, and then didn't. The police kept him in a room, cuffed for 4 hours, and then when they finally did start talking to him, they pressured him to confess as it will make things easier for him in the long run. They only let him go when his parents arrived and showed him proof of being in a basketball game on the other side of the country at the time of the alleged crime. Turns out the girl lied because she had a crush on him and wanted to give him her V-card if he were at the party. When he didn't turn up, she got drunk, slept with a random person, and woke up the next day with regret and blamed a friend. He was expelled from the school despite being let go. His official school record had arrested for assault on it, even though he was let go and nothing came of it. Because of that, he couldn't get a job until he turned 18 and his record was closed. He was 15 when they arrested him. I only learned he was innocent a few years ago after being led to believe by the press and everyone else I knew that knew him beyond the basketball team was told that he was a nonce and did this to a girl. I only put the pieces together when I looked into it at the party he was supposedly at and realized he was at the game solidly kicking my behind, dropping threes like it was going out of fashion. Sheesh, that's harsh, man. Couldn't the guy go to court for this? I mean, his image was tainted and caused his life to pretty much suck after that. Story 4. Looking into a laser or, if it's powerful enough, even at the dot it makes on a surface. Lasers are fun, but you have to know about their dangers. With enough juice, they can blind you permanently faster than any human can shut their eyes. They're saying among physicists, don't look into the laser with your remaining eye. Seriously though, the chance of going completely blind is very low, and if the beam itself is redirected into your eye, you'd have to be very unlucky for it to hit your optic nerve. And even then, you just lose one eye. Most likely, you'll just have a little black spot in your vision. The only thing that can realistically damage both your eyes at the same time would be the diffused reflection. However, in the visible range, you wouldn't even look at a spot directly that is bright enough to do that, because even seeing it from the corner of your eye would already make you shut them. As for invisible lasers, UV will be stopped by the surface of your eye, which will burn and blind you for a few days, but not permanently. In the IR, it really depends on the wavelength, but you need very high powers nonetheless. This is a story related to the eyes, but it's about the eclipse. A young woman visited New York Eye and Ear Infirmary of Mount Sinai Hospital shortly after the eclipse of August 21, 2017. She told Dr. Avnish Diabakta, an ophthalmologist, that she had a black area in her vision, and then drew a crescent shape for him on a piece of paper. When Dr. Diabakta examined her eyes, he was astonished. He saw a burn in her retina that was exactly the same shape. It was almost like a branding, he said. She had looked at the sun during the eclipse without any protection. The burn was an image of the sun's outer edge. Kinda reminds me of that video I saw of people pointing lasers at a plane. Man, what a crazy world we live in now. Story 5. A phone call. Yes, a phone call. I moved away and started a family a good distance from where I grew up. I received 4 of those calls, for each of my kids as grandparents. You know the call is coming sooner or later and you can't do anything about it. But here's a story with a bit of a happier ending. A long time ago, my dad had a heart attack. Fairly serious, but they could do a triple bypass and he'd be better. They did all that, I went back home, but my dad had to go into the hospital again with a couple heart issues. I gave a phone call to his room in the hospital. He called the nurse's desk and they patched it to the room. I talked to him the day before. So when I call and ask to talk to him in room so-and-so, and the nurse says in a very shocked voice, "He cannot talk because of the stroke he had, but he's not conscious. He's in a coma." And after she said that, the power went out in my house. This was a while ago. My phone was the landline that was wireless but connected to the base station. The call dropped. The base station lost power and my phone screamed static at me. I was standing there utterly shell-shocked in the dark with a handset screaming static at me. Turns out they had moved my dad out of that room and some poor and much older guy was in the room. The nurses all had a good laugh at the miscommunication. Me, not so much. Story 6. Getting in a bar fight. Known too many guys who thought it was worth it to defend their honor or not look like a fearful little girl or whatever. I remember one time I went to a bar with a best friend who liked to drink. I didn't like beer, so I went to just hang out and shoot some pool, and I also invited my then-girlfriend. I didn't have many clean clothes that night, and it was cold, so I wore a red fuzzy long-sleeve shirt with gold stars all over it that belonged to my girlfriend because I didn't give a care in the world what I wore to some bar in our podunk little town. As soon as I walked through the door into the bar, some drunk middle-aged lady sees me and yells, "Hey, star boy!" And she and the whole table she's at proceeded to laugh. I just ignored them, but it did make me kinda angry to think about it in front of my girlfriend too. I already had kinda low self-esteem at the time, and while it was my own decision to go to the bar with that on, it didn't stop me from having pretty graphic thoughts of what I'd do with her with a bottle. If it were a guy, it might have been a different story, but yeah, don't ever get in a bar fight or let your anger get the better of you, especially when alcohol is involved. Fighting and alcohol don't mix well at all. But do you know what does? Not cocktails, but hitting the like and subscribing to the channel. Didn't see that coming, huh? You probably wouldn't see what's coming in the next story as well. Let's get to it then. Story 7. Passing out. Hitting your head from just the tiniest force can end you or injure you for life. Definitely this one. I have narcolepsy as well as an unknown and unrelated problem that causes me to pass out when I stretch my back. Doctors still don't know why it happens, and I've had MRIs and x-rays of just about everything. It's been happening so long that I thought nothing of it and just considered it a funny thing that my body does. That is until one day when my ex, BF at the time, was out of town and I was left home alone. I ended up stretching my back. It's about a 50-50 chance I'll pass out, so I risked it. And I immediately knew I made the wrong choice. Usually I can control my pass out and slowly make my way to the floor, but not this time. I ended up swaying back and forth, and as I was trying to force my body to fall forward onto the bed, I ended up falling straight backwards, head first into a glass sliding door. Woke up a few minutes later with luckily no injuries and just a sore head. I ended up sitting on the ground for a while just thinking about how lucky I was and how it could have been so much worse, especially since no one was around. I thank God every day because that incident shook me to my core. Passing out is no joke and it happens so fast. It can really change your life in an instant. Story 8. A brain aneurysm. What sucks is sometimes there are no symptoms that lead up to it. Also, a lot of aneurysm symptoms are shared with a ton of other things. I had a ruptured aneurysm misdiagnosed as a migraine. 2 weeks later, I was poorly diagnosed after finally getting a CT scan. I only got the scan because I woke up with a blowout pupil and droopy eyelid. I was happy when I looked in the mirror and saw it, which is crazy, but I instantly thought to myself, now they will take my pain away. The pain was all I could think about at this point. I'd called the paramedics to my vehicle the day it happened. They convinced me it was a migraine and I could drive home. Went to the doctor's the next morning. She said the same. My symptoms were a sudden onset of pain or pain in the middle of my back, spine area, sweating profusely, blacking out or weakness. The pain started above my eye, then enveloped my whole skull. Lost the vision in the bottom parts of both eyes that night. The next day I had a stiff neck or shoulders. Doctor in the morning was a cold witch like pose. I filed a complaint after, but she lied in all her doctor's notes and my key symptoms were missing. It was like she knew I needed a CT scan and someone might be reading her notes someday, so she preemptively fixed them. I also had zero headache history. My eye is permanently messed up now, but I'm glad to be alive. Ruptures can slightly heal themselves, but are most always followed by a catastrophic bleed. It lasted 2 weeks. My blood pressure runs low, thank God for that. Doctors think it bled a total of 3 times during the 2 weeks based on what I told them. I've been noticing a trend with some doctors who seem to not believe their patients. Maybe it's just because of the junkies faking stuff to get their meds. Story 9. A police encounter. Maybe you just finished a hard shift, the day ended badly and just looked at your checking account which won't cover the bills. You get pulled over for going 5 over the speed limit even though people have been on your bumper for half a mile. The cop then doesn't like that you aren't smiling and being chipper and decides to find other issues with your car, so now you have a few hundred in fines and he's calling the dog to sniff your car. You get a call from the axe that you're a scumbag because you're now 10 minutes late to pick up your kid for the weekend. The dog starts doing the nasty to your leg, so you push it off and then are tased, roughed up, binned by the dog, and charged with multiple felonies for assault on an officer. Attempted murder of a police canine. You have no money to fight it. The ECF grabs your kid since you have not shown. The public defender is telling you to plead out no more than 7 years. You'll be out in 3. Quite specific, but oh my god, the dog getting nasty on the leg got me rolling. Story 10. Regarding the tailgating thing. That is entrapment but still happens. I got an emergency call out for a facility about 2 hours away one night a few months back. About 45 minutes up the road, some vehicle comes roaring up on me fast and turns on their high beams. They started tailgating me aggressively. I had my cruise control set to 55 miles per hour, so I just maintained my speed knowing they'd have an opportunity to pass just up the road, where it went to 4 lanes for a while. Nope, they stayed behind me for several miles before finally whipping out and roaring past. It was a cop. I was more than a bit irritated, but just kept right on going. It happened again when I crossed into the next county. I got to the facility, spent an hour fixing their problem, and then headed home. Sure enough, on the way back, there's still this stupidly steep hill about half a mile long where you have to gear down pretty aggressively or ride your brakes to maintain your speed. Being paranoid at this point, I geared down as I topped that hill. Sure enough, about halfway down, the vehicle behind me got right up on my bumper and flipped on their high beams. There was another lane where they could pass, but they wouldn't. I went all the way down that hill a smidge under the speed limit. Want to guess what sort of vehicle it was? Yep, another cop. I've never had that happen before, yet it happened 3 times in a single night. I've no doubt they were trying to get me to speed up or react in some way so they would have an excuse to give me a ticket. I have a dashcam that records front and rear views along with my speed. Even then, in my experience, evidence tends to be ignored unless you go to court with a lawyer. Story 11. Negligent homicide. I'm sure self-defense killings are not as difficult to handle as it is justified. Not saying everyone would be fine, but negligent homicide is another level. You drive drunk, textual driving, or not pay attention and smack into a pedestrian, you're going to live in a nightmare. Was driving home with my dad one night, like 1 a.m., wasn't going fast, like 30 kpm, and this random kid came from nowhere. I evaded him but damaged the front of my car pretty badly. When I got off the car, I was furious. What kid plays at freaking 1 a.m. in the street? I was ready to throw hands with whoever was his stupid parent. Could be freaking prime Mike Tyson, I don't give a f***. Then I understood. The kid was from a homeless family sleeping inside a tent in the street, and the kid waited till his parents got asleep to play. My heart sunk. Mother was hyper-apologetic, dad was furious with the kid. I couldn't do anything. The kid was already in trouble. Obviously, they didn't have the money. Talking with the dad was like, it's okay, don't be too harsh with the kid. Got in the car, called the insurance, and ended up paying like $5,000 for the fix. Sometime later, talking with my dad, he told me something like, $5,000 is a cheap price for not carrying a kid in your conscience. I imagined the picture if I didn't evade him. Yeah, he was right. Stopped complaining after that. I have a friend who was driving home from dropping his buddy at the airport at 2 a.m. Going along the highway, nothing weird happened. Normal, calm night. And boom, buddy hears and feels a massive impact against his 4x4. Gains control of the car, slows down, investigates. It's a person. Or was a person. Fast forward a few hours, the cops are called, they're there asking questions, identifying the corpse. Buddy gets taken in for more questioning about the speed he was going, etc. Eventually, the cops release him, no charges. He asks if something happened. They identified the deceased and contacted his family. Turns out his family had been contacting a different police station for hours trying to find their son. Story goes something happened in his life and he said goodbye to his family cryptically before disappearing for hours. Conclusion was he decided to end it all by lying in the highway. A friend just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. Didn't make what my buddy went through any easier. It took him years to get over it. Crap. This is dark and sad. Just in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's a good thing the guy was released after that, but I couldn't imagine the psychological damage this guy got. Story 12. Jumping into any unknown body of water head first. Happened to my brother. We were off the coast and had rented out a boat. He was 15. He dove in even though we shouted at him not to, and just a few seconds later, his body floated to the surface with his back toward the sky. My uncle jumped in and turned him over, and my brother shouted that he couldn't feel anything below his neck. We dragged him to shore, and I was confident he would die. He was, too. He was airlifted off that beach and brought to the ICU. He had metal put in his neck to repair the C6 vertebrae. Within the first few days, he began to regain feeling in his shoulders and arms and could move them again. Then he went to rehabilitation for 6 months. As the months went by, he regained more upper body strength, enough so that he managed to transition from an automatic to manual wheelchair. He insisted on continuing school throughout rehab and did so virtually. He returned home and my dad and I had to carry him up the stairs to his room for several weeks until we could get an elevator installed in the garage. He graduated from high school 2 years later as a salutatorian and gained entry into every Ivy League university and several reputable schools. Ultimately, he opted for Stanford, where he received his bachelor's and master's in computer science and graduated at the top of his class. After receiving a job offer from Facebook, he turned it down and insisted on pursuing a PhD to work in research for people who had gone through situations similar to him. Now, he's a Caltech neuroscience PhD candidate specializing in technology that should one day allow people who are unable to speak to project their thoughts onto a screen. And he can wiggle his toes. Just wanted to say that although something can absolutely change your life for the worse, it's possible that there's a silver lining. Not in the vast majority of circumstances, but surely in some. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.